Okay, hello everybody and welcome to St Pancras Church and to this event which coincides with Darwin's dream, the exhibition that we have on downstairs in the crypt, which will be open just following this talk and this event. I wanted to introduce what we're going to do with this panel here. My name's James Putnam and I'm a curator of the exhibition, together with Jill Silverman and Coenegrachts. We first came up with this idea in 2013, just over a year ago, when we met in Linz, in Austria, at the Ars Electronica award ceremony, where Koen Vanmechelen received this prestigious Golden Nika Award for innovation for hybridity in art. And it was at that point where we thought that it would be a very good opportunity to talk about the possibility of doing a big show of Koen's in London. He's never had a solo show here. He is shown at most of the major biennales all over the world, and big art museums, but never done a solo project here. Jill actually brought him first to London in a group show at the Listen Gallery back in 2000, which was the kind of inauguration of his Cosmopolitan Chicken project, of which we'll see more of it downstairs. And I'm not going to tell you that much about Koen's work, because he's here in person to tell you. We've also got Jean-Jacques Cassiman, a leading geneticist, who is going to talk to us. He's familiar with Koen's work, and we're very honored to have him here, to coincide with the exhibition. And I say exhibition, but I think what we're trying to do is take it beyond the exhibition and show a lot of the whole concept behind what Koen is doing, which goes way beyond what you see just in the art world here. Koen has also many foundations in various parts of the world, which show a lot of his, more, humanitarian interests. And I think Jill will probably agree with me that, apart from Koen, being we both work with lots of major international artists, but apart from Koen being a, extraordinary and dare I say, inspiring artist, he's also an extraordinary and inspiring human being. So I'm going to hand you right over to Koen now, who's going to tell you a bit about his projects and his work.
So, good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you, Jill and James, for bringing me here in London, for having my first solo show. I have to say it's really touching me. It's something we talked a lot during this week about it, and it is it's really fascinating to see how work from 2000 and further away comes now together in one show. And for me, it was very difficult. So I had a very good leading team who brought me to, I think, a very good definition of what I'm doing, and make more curious on what I'm gonna do in the future. Anyway, I like to give a brief lecture about my work, and I always started with this picture in any presentation that I give by saying this is not a chicken. I'm always saying it's a piece of art. And I say that because this is the most domesticated animal in the world, and this is the most purebred animal in the world. And I give you some numbers. There are 65 billion chickens every moment of the day, and also 300 billion eggs. That means something if we calculate that we are with 7 billion people in the world. And let me jump a little bit into the history so that you understand what I'm doing. There is actually only one chicken in the world, which is the red jungle fowl that lives at the feet of the Himalaya. And by mutation and manipulation, human beings brought this red jungle fowl all over the world. And in every country, we create a chicken that tells something about the country. So that means that the manipulation went that far that we're rebuilding this animal as a mirror of ourselves. A very good example of this is the poulet de Bresse from France. It is red in the head, white in the body, and has blue legs. It's the French flag. So we did it on purpose. And another example that I like to give you is the Chinese one. It's a hairy chicken. It's a silky. So we could never think about it, but the Chinese thought about it, you know. And you can say, is this a problem? And I would say that it is a problem because in one way or another, we blocked evolution. Because we like to have the poulet de Bresse always like a French flag, or the Chinese always like silky. So in a matter of fact, we were making a frame around a living object. And I think that's a little bit a problem. That's why I was coming up in 1999 with a big project which is called the Cosmopolitan Chicken Crossbreeding Project. And actually, it's love between chickens from different countries, you know? So I started to crossbreed the Mechelse koekoek from Belgium with the one from France, the poulet de Bresse. And I called the first action and the result a Mechelse Bresse. And that was very new. So for me, that was a piece of art. And then I continue. I went to England, I went to Germany, I went to France, I went to Brazil, to Mexico. So, in a matter of fact, at this moment, I have 3,000 chickens, and they have 18 different countries inside. So it's like a circle, and it's always fresh. It's never inbreeding. It's always diverse. If you talk about this on the level of art and you bring it into museums or in art spaces, I mean, you tackle something else. It's about multiculturalism, genetic engineering, cloning, globalization. I think it's a huge debate. And I believe when you bring two parts together, from different things, something new can come out of this. And I show you this picture because it's an artificial, of course. One part is the Mechelse koekoek, the other part is the poulet de Bresse. This was made before that I did these crossbreedings. And I have to tell you, I don't kill any chicken. I keep them until they die, and then I bring them into art. So it's about procreation, I think, the most driven force in life. And also about surprises, because I understood that I'm in confrontation with my own work, you know. Because the chicken gives itself to this project. On the other hand, it's revolting. And I'm screaming to this subject, you know. So I understand my position from in the beginning. One of very important surprises was the one that I brought to the Listen Gallery that Jill was curating at that time. And I remember very fresh that we talked about having the red cap, which is a specific English chicken. And then the story started that I couldn't find the red cap anymore because in the 60s it was so popular for egg production that it became infertile by inbreeding. So, and I was desperately, and I went to, Northampton, and there was a farmer, he had 3 of them. I bought them. He was very happy that I bought them because there was no offspring in 10 years. So that was a big challenge for this project. So I brought 2 of the female chickens into the Listen Gallery, and the one black rooster that you see on the picture, that one, who was born on the border between Belgium and France and Belgium. The crossbreeding. And look what happens. After 3 weeks, there was an offspring. So by bringing in a Belgium-French chicken, England becomes fertile. That's a hard one, huh? The next day it was on the cover of the Times because they say that it was better than the European Union, another one there. Anyway, fertility, crossbreeding and fertility, it's something, I guess. So what is this natural breeding? That's a question, or is this genetic engineering? I think it's a very open question, and it's a very hard one. And I think it's in the middle of it. Because after, 20 years of doing this crossbreeding, what I discovered that you see already on the surface, all the phenotypes, that there's a lot of diversity. And from in the beginning of my project, I was very curious about it. I was very curious about this diversity, because if you can see so much diversity on the surface, the question is, what is happening inside? So with one of my friends, Luc Freeling, a professor, a stomatolog, he introduced me in the world of scannings. So first, with the chickens who died, we went to see inside. And it was a complete discovery because he introduced me into the world of the scanning and the 3D printing already in 1999. To be clear, there is no chicken inside here. It's a complete 3D scanning. I call it a virtual crossing, a crossing before the actual crossing was there. So making 3D models in a 3D program, digital, bring them together, and then there is a kind of other incubator, a 3D incubator, who was written this sculpture. And I think that was very inspiring. It was very inspiring because it's something that looks like an archaeological piece, but one from the future, Also, my work with glass in Murano with Berengo is very inspiring because I think glass is a living material. It's built up out of the 4 elements of life. And in the same time, it's very inspiring because it's open, it's clear, and you can fill in your ideas. And I believe in crossings. I believe when you bring, for example, art, science, philosophy together, something new can come out. And so that's how my relationship with science came out. The past, the present, and the future. And you can tell it with this kind of sculptures. So where do we come from? That was a very hard question, because every 2-3 years I do an expedition to the Himalaya to see where the chicken lives. And I discover that the chicken lives on the border between the jungle and civilization. And that was very important because I felt very much like a jungle fowl. An artist, he has an interest what's happening in the world, but he likes to stay wild as well. And that gives me also this question, my Dr. Honoris Causa on the University of Medicines, because now later in science they proved that the first move came from the chicken to human. So the domestication was coming from the chicken itself. And that was a question that I was really asking myself when I was in the jungle. Who came to who? And then we have to be careful if this is the answer, because we use every little part of this animal. We use it in fashion, we use it in consumption. I mentioned this 65 billion chickens. Construction, destruction, it gives you something, but you take also something. One of the main things is also that the chicken tells you in the jungle when danger is coming because of the position on the border. It can tell you when humans were coming or when other animals were coming into the wild to catch, So the signal function is very important. So the question is, knowing this all, how do we balance, culture, nature, human nature? And we are nature, and we are forgotten, That brings me to the philosophical model of the whole Cosmopolitan Chicken Project. Well, it's quite a difficult one, but I will explain it very briefly. I think the horizontal lines that you see here are the lines of consumption, let's say manipulation, because you can easily copy the product, and the product of the ID is on the horizontal line, then mutation is always when you can jump to another level. And that's always when there is some kind of junction, you know, between different things. So there is the crossing coming. And I think that the Cosmopolitan Chicken Project is going in that kind of evolution. So I'm always waiting for mutation. That's actually what I'm doing. What is our position in this world? Are we poisoning the world? Or are we making it fertile? Dealing with our environment, for example. I made a huge installation in the Biennial of Guangzhou in China, where I was making a jungle on the first floor. It was 1,000 square meters. I let people walking into that, wearing a mask every day. 2,000 Chinese were crossing this jungle, you know, and to let them see the jungle fall, the source of life. And when you step out of the jungle, which was 45 degrees, by the way, you came in a refrigerator. And in the refrigerator, there were all the eggs of the different generations of the crossbreeding. They were all stamped, you know, having beautiful marks like we always do in our domestication world, you know, because we are the most domesticated animal, by the way. But anyway, what do we have to protect? Do we have to protect the jungle fall, or do we have to protect what we are making? So it's a kind of rebirthing, and that's why when you stepped out of the refrigerator, you came in a huge human incubator, facing the one in the jungle who's looking from one place to another, searching for 37.6 degrees to come out, exactly the temperature that we need for breeding. So environment is very important in my work. In 2003, there was a chicken flu. And, you know, I was under attack. I understand that environment was very important. So I started to collect the DNA and the sperm of all the chickens. So I was forced by nature to do something. And I was making my frozen culture project. And I was bringing all the DNA, the sperm, into a freezing ton in a lab, minus 192 degrees. Under the title as well as, is this hybrid? Are we afraid of our environment? Because we cannot live without, you know? Anyway, it forced me to spread my whole project in different parts in the world. At the moment, I have 8 breeding centers. And I did it because, you know, I want to make a crossing with Africa, but I was not allowed to bring African chickens into Belgium. Can you see the metaphor that how it is, you know? So I started to make a center in Arusha. And that was very interesting because changing all these environments, changing all climates, it came of interest of not only the Biennial of Dakar in Africa to show the project, but also the scientists. And Nature was publishing the chicken on the cover in 2003 by saying that it's the most important animal in science for medication against degeneration, diseases, and viruses. So, under the lead of Jean-Jacques Cassiman, we start to bleed, like they say, all the chickens in this project, and we're talking about 3,000 chickens, and to see what the DNA give us. And we had 3 important questions. What about the fertility? What about the immunity? And what about the diversity? And after 8 years of this research, we could say that fertility, immunity, and diversity increased enormously. And what kind of advantages can that give us for us? What can we learn? Because I think this is natural knowledge. The whole project is dealing with bio and culture diversity. That's why all the publications that I do it together with the books of human rights. I think to have nature, to have space, it's a human right. We work together with the World Health Organization in Geneva with it. It's about energy, communication, and life. This is what we have to give further to different and new generations. That's why I opened my Open University of Diversity, which is actually my studio. But my studio is a breeding center. It's a place where new animals are born. This is the breeding center. But also, we will bring them back to the wild. It's a kind of de-domestication program. So the Open University of Diversity is actually a think tank. We will bring people from different professions together to speak about all these different topics. It's a space where you can see my work, where we can breed, but also it's an idea that moves to different places in the world, like the Biennial of Venice, in case of this picture, where I put the chicken, the marble chicken, in Palazzo Loredan, a place where that art and science was coming together for many years between all the famous scientists and artists. And in the library upstairs, we had the incubators where new life was coming out, but also intellectual life. We were making connection between different universities in the world by having biological, anthropological, and science studies. We do lectures because I think knowledge we have to share, and we bring the books and the whole ideas here, for example, in Documenta, under the title Hybridity in Art and Science. I think we have to take the chance to look together with different professions in the transparent egg of tomorrow, because every organism is looking for another organism to survive. I thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm sorry, I'm a human geneticist. I don't know anything about chickens except that you can eat them. But the reason I'm here is that almost 10 years ago, I was sitting in my office and there was this guy coming in, wanting to see me. And he said, I do this project, this art project on chickens, and I would like you to collaborate with me. But he asked it very nicely. And of course, when he told me what the project he was doing was about, as a human geneticist, and I'll try to convince you briefly with some slides on this, I could not refuse going into this, although it was not obvious. And of course, I had to create or set up a group of people who knew what the genetics of chickens were, because, as I told you, I only know something about human genetics. But it's all about genetic diversity and the mechanisms we know today about genetic diversity in humans, of course, in the first place, but also in all animals. And it's a little bit in this Darwin's dream, as the exhibition is called today, the Koen's exhibition. One cannot imagine what Darwin would have dreamed if he had known what we know today, as far as the technology, as far as the knowledge we have, and the possibilities of examining that basic material that's responsible for the genetics, and that is our DNA. Now we know through this Human Genome Project, which has spent more than 10 years and a lot of about $3 billion, we know that the human DNA and animal DNA can today be analyzed in complete detail, and that there's a lot of information. It's compared, for humans at least, to about 130 books of information that we can read, although we have immediately to say also that it's not because we can read them that we can understand all these books, all the chapters or the paragraphs of these books. But progressively, since the technology is there, the knowledge is increasing, we'll end up in a few years, maybe 10, 50 years, we'll end up understanding what is written in all these books. And this is not only for humans the case, it's true for all animals, because we have to realize we have DNA. Our parents gave us that DNA, but our grandparents also shared some of that DNA, a quarter of that DNA. If you go back in time, you'll end up in the beginning of the evolution of this earth, and you realize that all living organisms today, be it bacteria, be it animals, be it plants, can function based on the DNA they have. And so we share some of our DNA with all living organisms. And for chickens, it's about 60% of our DNA that we share. Now, what we also know is that DNA is influenced by the environment in which the child, the embryo, will first grow in the uterus of the mother, but after birth, this continues, this influence, this conditioning of our DNA, the way it will function. So in other words, DNA alone will never be able to explain all normal characteristics, behavior, physical characteristics, and also diseases or risks to diseases. But of course, it is basically important in all these aspects. But you see, you can also already see some parallel with what could do in other living organisms, and in particular in the chickens and in the cosmopolitan chicken project that Koen explained to you. Now, what we should not forget is in addition to this environment, or that part of this environment, is all these bacteria, these billions of bacteria that are on our skin, in our mouth, ears, in our nose, in our throat, in our gut, and that these billions of bacteria play an active role in the way our immune system, our defense against bacterial infections or viral infections occur. And that we share, at least initially, in the beginning of our life, we share most of the flora of the gut with the mother that gave birth to us. And these different aspects will need to be better understood in the future so that we progressively understand how our organs, how our organism as a whole can function and behave or have physical or disease characteristics that we know. Now, thanks to the technology that's available, we also know a lot more about our origins. It's not only the origins of the chickens, but also the origins of humans that become better known. And for example, we know that our origins of the whole world population has to be situated 150, 200,000 years in Africa. And that about 70,000 years ago, small groups started to migrate out of Africa through different routes, and that essentially the whole world was populated from this initial Homo sapiens population, as we know. And that during this migration, our ancestors met those related Homo species, like the Neanderthaler, like the Denisovan, where rests were found in Siberia. And they were very friendly with them, and a bit more than friendly, because all of us share some DNA with these Neanderthals. We inherited part of our DNA from these Neanderthals. And I can tell you I have 3%, which is maybe not surprising for you, but you also have a piece of your DNA that's determined, or that's the origin, which is either Denisovan or Neanderthaler. But the fact that we know this allows us to study what the contribution is of this Neanderthal DNA to us. And we already know that some pieces of that DNA allow people to survive at higher altitudes, for example. And that's thanks to that DNA that was given to us, or to some of us, by the Neanderthals. Now, the diversity as a result of this, since we do not share the same Neanderthaler DNA, will increase, of course. And the diversity has increased so much over these 150, 200,000 years, and that it's much more than one would have expected in such a short time, looking from a standpoint of evolution, as Darwin might have done. But essentially, nevertheless, while individual differences are quite important, if one looks at DNA from different populations, one can compare it to skin pigmentation, where some people take their white people, their brown people, north of Africa, and black people in Africa. Where essentially, when you look closer, you have all gradients in this, going from white to full black. And DNA is precisely the same thing. It has not been possible up till now to show that particular populations have a DNA that is different from other populations. And that's not surprising, because we all descend from the same original Homo sapiens population in Africa, that we share this. There are some quantitative differences, but it's important to realize that we are very related to each other, although individual, the differences may be major. Now, through this technology and through this knowledge, I got involved in different additional aspects, like historical cases, like working with the law to identify murders or other people who were convicted essentially from other mistakes. In archaeology, if one finds human remains, but also animal remains, bacterial remains, one can get a better idea through DNA analysis of what happened in those sites. And finally, almost 10 years ago, this artist came to see me and say, well, won't you collaborate with me, because I have this cosmopolitan chicken project. And we decided to collaborate on this in the respect of each other's approach. He's an artist and I'm a scientist, and not the other way around. And so if we keep our expertise, then each expertise, then we can make more than two. 1 + 1 is more than 2, I would say. And so this introduced me to the Cosmopolitan Chicken Project, where we added an R in the chicken project, and it's now the Cosmopolitan Chicken Research Project, with an approach, since I collaborated with people who know animal genetics, and in particular chicken genetics, and we started analyzing and asking questions that can be answered scientifically, but based on what Koen has done. And the first question that came up is, how clean are these chickens he started with? This poulet de Bresse, this Merels de Koekoek, and so on. How genetically, since they're all created by human, as he mentioned, they should be genetically all identical if you take different animals from the same species. And you see, this is one way that this DNA results can be interpreted, and essentially, without being technical, what we analyzed was about 60 positions spread all over the DNA of these chickens, and those results can then be interpreted or analyzed bioinformatically in this way. And you see these different species can be distinguished from each other in this approach. So that's a good start, let's say. They are different to start with. But then the next question one can ask, well, if you take these chickens from different tailors, are they all clean, the same species? And there you see that the inbreeding, that is how, let's say, how similar is the DNA of the chickens. One is called Merels de Koekoek, poulet de Bresse, and so on and so forth. You'll see that there's quite some variability. If you have all the tailors that were examined, where chickens were examined, here are their numbers, and you see there's quite some variation. So what you buy is not necessarily what you're supposed to be buying from that particular tailor. And of course, the tailors are extremely interested in these results, because they would like to improve whatever they're planning. But it's good to know that depending on the animals Koen started with, that there may be some variability in the results, as far as scientifically at least. And then the next question is, of course, based on the DNA analysis that we could do from hundreds of these chickens, can one get a better idea of what the founding fathers were? Is it the red jungle foal of one of the other jungle foals? And to make a long story short, essentially the data we have suggests that the red jungle foal is the major ancestor of all the chickens that have been tested. The others may have contributed a little bit. The story is not finished, and I know that other groups in research have published similar results. Now, then we can go to the crossbreds. He started with poulet de Bresse, Merels de Koekoek, and so on. And just to illustrate what the analysis shows, you have the poulet de Bresse, the blue dots here. You have the Merels de Koekoek, the gray dots. and then you would, sorry, these yellow-green dots, and then the crossbred of these two is right in the middle of the two. So that's a little bit what you would expect if indeed the crossbred is what it's supposed to give as far as result under the analysis. And so all the different hybrids were analyzed and all the data were put together. And then we see some quite dramatic changes in the inbreeding as the crosses progressed over time. And this is from the first 10 hybrids initially that were analyzed. I'll show you immediately some data on more. But you see there's a change compared to the Mechelen-Cuckoo, the pure Mechelen-Cuckoo, and the hybrids that you get. But it's not always the hybrids that are the highest diverse in their genes. So there might be something there that we did not understand initially. And so a new way of presenting the same data, you have poulet de Bresse on the top here. There's another way of showing this DNA result. And of course, it's not all the poulet de Bresse that were examined are not identical, and that I've told you before. And all the Mechelen-Cuckoo that are not identical. There's some variability, but the cross between the two shows you red and blue, which is something you would expect. Of course, there's some overlap. They share some DNA before you cross them as purebreds, and that's perfectly possible. And then if you go further, you see something similar happening. A few generations, almost 12, 13 generations after the first one, you see that the colors also change. But there is an additional aspect which is important. Since the hybrids, which are the latest result of the crossbred, are bred with a purebred again, it's understandable, here's a purebred, the dark blue here, it's understandable that, that the end result of this hybrid is not essentially 50-50 from the one parent and 50 from the other parent. There's some variability. So in other words, there seemed to be a dilution of the initial Mechelen-Cuckoo progressively over the 15 generations as he has them today. And of course, these are some of these results because doing scientific research is wet research, particularly when you do DNA analysis. It requires a lot of bioinformatics, and that's not cheap, as you should know. And so the budgets that one can obtain for this type of research are limited for the simple reason that the artists, if you ask committees or whatever who provide money for artistic projects will say, well, this is not really an art project, it's an art and science project. And the scientists will say, well, this is not really a science project because it's an art science project. And so it's not easy to obtain all the money because the potential of this project is that 100 scientists could work on different aspects. Particularly if you think of what I said in the beginning on the human genetic diversity, not only on the diversity in the DNA, but also diversity in the environment and its effect on the DNA of these chickens, the microbiome, the gut flora, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of opportunities. There are some results. They're quite interesting. I hope I've tried to convince you. And if Koen continues to breed the other generations, it's clear that the diversity will increase and give further opportunity to do further studies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Jacques. We're going to have a little bit of discussion about Koen's work in relation to all this research, and I'm going to pass you over to
Hi. I think that what first comes to mind in listening to Jean-Jacques is that, in fact, art is art and science is science. And what we have tried to bring into a sort of clear poetic organization in the exhibition itself is a hypothetical discussion. And what we know is that art is produced in a deeply intuitive place in the artist's mind, and the products that come from an artistic intuition are both magical and problematic. They can be upsetting, they can be pleasing, they can be a combination of both. And the project that Koen has been working on from the time that I first saw it in 1999 is in some ways a hypothetical question. And this has to do with where are the borders of art situated? And is it enough to understand that an installation that contains chickens in one room, a rooster in a cage outside of a museum, an installation in the next room with incubators, and a wall full of repetitive serial documentation that can look abstract from a distance of 10 or 15 feet, but when you approach, you realize that what you're looking at are highly specified physical observations that have been done with the discipline of a strategic military plan, that this is not airy-fairy, this is not expressionistic, that what we have is a concept of art that is far broader and far more inclusive than what we see in a laboratory, in a genetics laboratory, for example. And so I suppose I'm opening with an observation from our side, which has to do with Darwin, perhaps, that it seemed fitting when James and I met in Austria and we started talking about how much we admired Koen's practice and how little it had been seen in the Anglo-Saxon world, and we began to talk about London and Darwin and natural science. And that there was something in the creativity of Darwin and also in the distance that Darwin took from the natural world. Because what we inherited in his journals from the Beagle are incredibly precise note-taking about everything that he saw and the variation in everything that he saw. And so, in a sense, he was working on a grand unifying theory of nature. And it seems to me that the type of inspiration that an artist like Koen takes from nature is fuzzy around the edges, because nature is both fuzzy and precise. And in a sense, you see this most clearly in genetics, that it is precise and fuzzy. And the intuition that brought you to imagine a breeding program before you'd ever bred the first chickens in its inception is a kind of creative dreaming that I think we can see in relationship to the very clear and specific plot that Darwin made for his life and his research. So I wanted to put out this question of comparing the methodology of an artist in his studio with a naturalist in his boat, going to the Galapagos and writing down everything that he sees, which now, all of these decades later, are extremely important in the discussion of how species mutate and change and survive with the kind of thinking that goes on in the university or the industrial laboratory with genetics. So are we talking about one type of thinking, one type of inspiration, or how do we see this? Koen.
So first of all, I like to step away from the military action. I think it's just the opposite. Absolutely, it's great diversity because we cannot live without. That was clear in my talk, I think. Now, Darwin's dream, in my opinion, comes up as a question. Could this be a dream of Darwin? That is what's for me very essential. That it is a question, because we are changing our position continuously. We also have here, and I'm saying this especially because also in the audience we have Olivier Hanot here from the University of Nottingham. He told me that through the DNA of the chicken you can see the migration of human beings. And that's very interesting because there seems to be a contract between the chicken and human to discover the globe. And to discover the globe, that means that you have to adapt the different forms of life. So through diversity, you become successful. This is one point. So in relation to the question, could it be Darwin's dream? There is immediately the question of the de-domestication, because the chicken now come to a point that we are making it like one species, but we lose all the rest of the species, and that is a very dangerous position, because we narrow in one way or another the genetics there, and then we lose the species. So that's one thing, to open up and to make it diverse, then to give it a new position, you know? To de-domesticate it today, you never go back to the beginning of the project, or the jungle fall or the wild, but you can de-domesticate it in the position that it is now. Just like we are, you know, we are in a position that we travel over the world and we don't know where we come from, we don't know where we go, but we have to reposition ourselves every time and every day. In a matter of fact, we have to become an immigrant in our brain. So the question is there. So let me take it from that question. So maybe maybe Jean-Jacques or can say something about that one, because I don't want to have it as a Darwin's dream, but as a question: could it be a Darwin's dream related to de-domestication?
Yeah, I can only agree with this, but there was a question on methodology, and I think it's important that people realize that this initially was Koen's idea, and as a scientist, we would probably never have done the thing he has done. I actually don't know anybody in the world who has done something similar. It's quite unique in the world, also from the scientific point of view. But scientists would do it different. But scientists would not collaborate with him if his methodology was not too good and not too reproductive, what he does. So it's only because we know exactly we can have so many chickens, we can have it at that time, we can have eggs at that time, we can analyze this, because he has all the information is written down, essentially. He knows every chick, and
which is what Darwin did as well.
exactly.
Yeah,
so the documentation of the information is there, and that's not something you could do with every artist, because some of them would change their mind, have no books at all, just be creative and stop there. And that's why scientists can collaborate with him. We have a different methodology, but he has to be as secure as we are, because otherwise it's impossible. We would never get anywhere. It would be very interesting to spend some time and to spend some money with him, but that there would stop. And so that's extremely important, that he has a methodology that we can understand. I don't always understand his ideas, but that's not necessary. I have to interpret or translate his ideas, but we can ask specific scientific questions on what he's doing, and that's very important.
James.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Koen how he makes a decision about how much of his research work becomes art, and what are the particular aspects that he chooses or he looks for in the presentation of the work, say, for instance, the taxidermied chickens or the the video works or whatever.
So for me, it's clear that all is art. It's not. I'm not have a brain who thinks now I'm gonna do something for science and now I'm gonna do something for art. So for me, it's art. And especially because for me, I'm looking for all these surprises, you know. The selection that I do on which chicken that I gonna take is based on emotions. Like I give you a good example. There in the museum, the first show that I did in Belgium, on the border there between between Belgium and France. So all of a sudden, between all the gray and the white chicks, there was one black one, you know. So and that was born on Eclipse Day. So coincidence, born. A bird that was born on an eclipse day and it was black. So I thought, okay, that can be a special one. So that one, I took it further to the next generation. So that action already, in my opinion, is art, because there is no scientist who will take it, I mean, from a bird who's born on eclipse day. It doesn't matter, you know, but for me it does matter. And then I was bringing it to London, so to make the crossing here. And then I discovered other things. I first discovered that the jungle fowl that who lives in the jungle does a changing of feathers after the mating season. It becomes from color to black, and that they call an eclipse mold. So, you know, these kinds of coincidence that brings you to the importance of such an animal, in my opinion, again, it's not scientific. But then, what we discovered later, that this rooster, who was sitting with 3 hens in the gallery, was that one hen was chosen for that black rooster, and the 2 other hens had no chance. And then I came back to the red jungle fowl, where you see that this one is monogamous. So how many coincidences can you have after each other? So that means that the choice of having that black rooster for me was absolutely the biggest art piece you ever could make. And then seeing that those 3 hens were already for 10 years infertile, and then making a combination with the black one and becomes fertile again, or takes up the fertility, I mean, and then gives birth to 13 young chicks in the gallery. I mean, if this was not happen, there was not a cosmopolitan chicken project for 20 years. So those things are always in my mind, and always I'm searching for this kind of special thing which gives me a signal to go on. It's not voodoo, by the way. But anyway, it's another approach. And I always take it from there. I will never accept it from the side of science, because also when I do that, I will lose the science, because they are much better in calculating the things. So we have to have it from surprises, and we have a couple of examples in the show today. And Jill was showing me today. She said, "Look what you did here in this." In this playboard, yeah. So there was one with as we think it is wrong, a wrong phase or a wrong feathers, and out of this came a very beautiful one. That is a surprise. You can never calculate that, you know, even not in science.
I mean, one of my favorites in the exhibition is the video of you rebuilding the chicken that looks at first sight like Koen is eating the chicken, but in fact he's rebuilding it. Can you tell us a bit about the symbolism or the concept behind that?
So first of all, the show, and we talked about this show a long time. I think we worked 1 year, full year on the show, and for me it's very surprising to bring things which were made 20 years ago together with things that I make now at this moment. So this video was taken 15 years ago, and it is a video that I'm eating a chicken, but when you look very carefully, I'm rebuilding the chicken. I'm not, it's in reverse. And you know, now I come to a point that we can show it, because here in the crypt, there is, it's like a graveyard, and in between the graveyard, it is very essential. We put the passports on marble of the chickens who died in the beginning, the parents of the whole project, and then me in a video who is not eating the chicken but rebuilding it. You know, turning the whole thing into life, coming from a crypt. I think that's very important. And sometimes you have to wait more than 10 to 20 years to make your real installation. And I think now at this moment, this installation is really an example. But there are a couple of installations that are really an example that it needs so many years to come together.
I just want to say a couple of short things about the exhibition before everybody goes down, and we're going to open the conversation to questions in a moment. When you are in the middle of Darwin's dream, I think it's interesting to know that this is one of the rare times in Koen's exhibition history that there has not been a living animal. And this is because there were restrictions in the church guidelines to having living animals in the crypt of the church, and we'll let you imagine what those various guidelines were about. So we had an aesthetic issue with how to create the presence of these animals without the animals themselves, and the taxidermied installation is not a substitute for that. There have been sculptural projects with the taxidermied 18 generations of the crossbred chickens, but I think what you will sense, hopefully, if you have a moment of clarity, is that the presence of these animals is everywhere around us in this crypt, and it has an energy that is very lively and very subtle at the same time, and a visual strength that is a play with scale and our understanding of how the size of the human world and the size of the animal world are interchangeable. And I'll let you have the last word, since it's your exhibition, and then we'll open up for questions. Yeah?
No, there is no last word. I think it's good that we open the floor for some questions, if there are.
Is there a final destination for the project? Is there somewhere you're trying to get to, or is it completely open-ended?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because you know, I think that an artist's his work is based on a desire. And I think that is the biggest difference between creating a product that you can easily sell. You know, that's you know exactly how big the project is, how much weight it has, how much you know, how much you can produce. So first, that's one thing. You know, you don't know where you're going, but you can really feel where you're going. So that's a big desire. And if you see it from my presentation during so many years, I'm building up something which was in mind, which was there in already, and this is very special here in this exhibition as well. You see the first cardboards of the idea of the cosmopolitan chicken, which everything was already in there. But it was not in developing yet. I could say that the genes were there, but you didn't have the picture yet. And so that's the wonderful thing about art. You know, you have the idea and it grows in your head, and in your head you are fulfilling the details that were already there. In the beginning, you don't understand it really. Yeah? In the beginning, is like well. First of all, you never will understand. But in the beginning it's different, because you think you have a big idea, you make that work, and you think you have to step to another one. But that's actually not true. It is there, and it is like it's one picture, you know. And your whole life you will work on that one picture where I have an idea where it goes to, because if you see that I developed this in art, which I think I still stay, I'm an artist, you know, who gives comment on society, and next to that we develop all our foundations, and those foundations, they can work directly into society, and that's very important that it's there, because you can it's like ping pong, you know, you can go from your art and you give it to society, and society gives it back to your art, and that is how it's become universal. So I think, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing what I really can answer on this question, but I think it's a very good one.
Well, maybe the question was more about whether the breeding program has an end or not. But I think it's not.
I don't think so. I think that that it was where does it go through, you know, because you know a continuity of crossings is a continuity of crossings, but where it goes through is that it talks with society, and that it gives you always something back, and that it grows to a certain point, which I don't know at this moment what it is, but I'm sure that it is something. That's something else.
Hi, can you tell us about what's next? Where does the project go from here? How diverse does this go?
Shall I tell? Yeah. Well, the project is growing enormously. So having all the time, like I said, have the different foundations, because we have a foundation on fertility in developing countries, which calls the walking egg, and which is a very old foundation already. It's 15 years old. That deals with fertility in developing countries on you know, based on the fact that in Western countries we can help people very easily when they can have no children, you know. But what are we doing? What are we doing with people on the other side of the world? And that's a very difficult question. Do we have to help there? Yes or no? And I think we talk with the World Health Organization on that level, on family planning, and you know, that's a foundation. Another one is the Cosmopolitan Chicken Research Foundation, where we're really looking into these genes, and where we're trying to where we're trying to find answers on fertility, on hybridity, and diversity. But the goal there is human research, of course. Another foundation is one about children's rights that goes very back into the beginning of my work. The wooden sculptures, and when I was still a child, you know, the ideas were already in there, and I bring this sculpture at this moment to 34 different countries in the world, where we are talking to children and say, you can step out your frame like a chicken who's blocked by evolution. So also children who don't have the let's say, the chance, because we are building these sculptures in the slums in Mumbai, or in Zimbabwe, in an orphan house, or but even in New York, or in Belgium, to listen to children what they have to say. That's another one. And then the one of the remembering of the First World War, where we're gonna make 600,000 sculptures by crowdsourcing and making studios all over Europe. That we can't forget what was ever happened. Well, if you have this kind of foundations, and you have your studio working on the Cosmopolitan Chicken project, and it becomes like a studio with different labs, the labs of thinking, but the laboratorium of thinking, laboratorium of making, just all this kind of ideas. So now I have the opportunity to have a city in Belgium, which is Genk, which is very cosmopolitan city, by the way, on the border between different countries. The mayor gave me the space of a formal zoo. And it's completely, it's 24 hectares. So we're gonna build a completely new studio and bring all the foundations together. And Mario Botta, the architect, he's gonna build the studio. And I'm very glad, because now in January we will start it, and it will called La Biomista. And La Biomista is actually a new word, but it means mixed life. And it's going to be something that people can discover on different levels. So if you step into the villa, who is still there will be the foundations, like a lock, like a library of collective knowledge, where all the knowledge of the different foundations will be as an artistical library. And when you step out, you go to the studio, where you see the different steps of breathings. Maybe as well a 3D lab, where I was talking about. And then you step out, you go to the park, and you will find different animals, but in a different logic, not in the logic of a zoo, but in the logic of intellectual thinking. And so that we more and more understand where we have to find the balance between culture and nature.
I want to ask a question, because you were talking about human being the most domesticated species, and also that we should maintain the genetic diversity. And just taking from all these crossbreeding of chicken into this idea of multiculturalism, are we as human being domesticated so much that we need to be de-domesticated? Are we becoming one?
Well, from a human point of view, let's say, and from a geneticist point of view, not from an individual point of view, but as a geneticist, you look at populations and the diversity that we see occurring, because there's a mixture between populations increasingly all over the world. From a geneticist point of view, that's a good thing, to have diversity, because we know that in evolution, diversity was the key for evolution, because the environment changed, and only those who were best adapted were able to reproduce and to have more children. And so from that point of view, that's very positive that the diversity increases. And that's a little bit also what is happening with the chickens. On an individual level, it may not be that interesting to have increased diversity, but that's something different. It's different, okay? That's not what the project as model is proposing and is bringing. As far as a research object, it's easier to cross chickens than to cross humans, and it's much faster.
No, but there is also a social point of view, I think. I mean, what I also mean with de-domestication is that if we are going too far, you know, and we forget that we are nature, you know, then it goes against us, you know. You can see it in the movement, what is going on at this moment, you know. A lot of things were based on monocultures. Like in the industry, because we believed in that, and on a certain level, it's also easy. You know, you were sitting all on benches; they are all the same. That's very easy because you can put it in production. You know, in a matter of fact, like if we think about Warhol, if he was making his silk screens, you know, he was from a point of view of the. Of an American society who was there and having consumption, mass production, and that was very easy. But from the moment that you are dealing with human beings or with living with nature in general, then it becomes completely different. I mean, then you have to increase the diversity, because otherwise everything is locked up, and then it's finished. And we see it that it's very dangerous to narrow things also in the development of cities, for example. That's why today it's very important to think about urban farming, for example, because we made different parts in towns and villages, and well, especially in cities, that you have a cluster of this and this and this and this. But when there is a problem inside, you know, it all dies. When it is diverse, it starts to live, you know. So it's a movement a little bit now who's saying, okay, we have to produce this local and then it can go global instead of making it global and go local. So I think it's always very wise to see again the position where we're in, you know. And that's, in my opinion, always linked to de-domestication, because you have to step away from what we already did and to break that frame to get something else. That's, I mean, in my opinion, at this moment, very vital to do that.
20 years is an impressive amount of time to spend on an artistic project. Could you just briefly discuss your funding strategies, I guess, originally, and then perhaps, excuse the pun, if they've evolved over the course of the project?
Well, first of all, there is no strategy in that case. But you know, there are many schools now of who come to my studio and asking, and they see a new developing model of a company, and I have no idea why they are coming. So also they stay in my studio for 3 days, the University of Amsterdam, for example, to see what kind of model that it is. And there's it's very funny, but there seems to be a model. There seems to be a model. But it's just like I said before, it was already in the concept and it grows there. And the model, in a matter of fact, is something strange. That you have the Cosmopolitan Chicken Project. Of course, the model deals with galleries, you know, with main galleries and exhibitions, and there of that it generates money. But also the Cosmopolitan Chicken Project gives works to the different foundations, and also through the works it's linked to money, you know, so that the money that we have the money to do the research on the different levels, and then the intellect of this comes back to the Cosmopolitan Chicken Project. And that's why I'm saying that's interesting, because Cosmopolitan Chicken Project can be on an individual level, you know, it can deal with active subjects, and then it can become universal, but it gives a lot of intellect from all this foundation come back to and that generate works, you know, and that's a model how you finance these things. But we don't have any grants or something. Yeah?
I think we might have to close now, because our exhibition is supposed to open downstairs. But I'd like to thank very much Koen and Jean-Jacques and Jill for speaking to us and giving us some insight into the Koen's world. And very generously, we have complimentary copies of the catalogue that runs along with the show in a rather handsome cloth bag, and you're all welcome to take free copies of this to take with you. Thank you very much, everybody.